What happens when a police chief's son assaults a decorated veteran and then walks into my courtroom thinking his father's badge makes him untouchable? This arrogant young man stood before me with a smirk on his face, telling me I couldn't do anything to him because his daddy runs the police department. But what he didn't know was that his father, Police Chief Marcus Webb, was sitting in the back of my courtroom, watching his son destroy everything he'd spent 30 years building. And the choice I forced that father to make between protecting his son and upholding justice would become the most powerful moment I've ever witnessed on the bench. Before we get into this story, less than 5% of you watching are subscribed. If you believe in real justice, if you respect our veterans, and if you think privilege shouldn't put anyone above the law, hit that subscribe button right now. What happens next is going to blow your mind. It was a Tuesday morning in Detroit, and I was reviewing my cases for the day when one file made me stop cold. The victim was a 68-year-old Army veteran named William Hayes. The defendant was 29-year-old Brandon Webb, son of Police Chief Marcus Webb. Now, I've been on this bench a long time. I've seen every kind of case you can imagine. But something about this one felt different. Something about it made my blood pressure rise before I even stepped into that courtroom. The case file told a story that made me sick to my stomach. 5 days earlier, William Hayes had been shopping at a grocery store when Brandon Webb cut in front of him in the checkout line. When Hayes politely asked him to go to the back of the line, Brandon turned around and told him to mind his own business. According to 4 witnesses, when Hayes insisted that everyone should wait their turn, Brandon shoved the elderly veteran so hard that he fell backward into a display, crashing to the floor. Hayes suffered a severe head injury, a dislocated shoulder, and cuts all over his back from the broken merchandise. He spent 3 days in the hospital. And here's the part that made it worse. When store security tried to stop Brandon, he flashed his father's police badge that he kept in his wallet and said, "You better let me go right now, or I'll have this store shut down by tomorrow. My father runs this city." Then he walked out like nothing happened. The security footage went viral within hours. The entire city was outraged. People were calling for justice. Veterans groups were protesting outside the police station. And everyone wanted to know if the police chief's son would face real consequences, or if this would be swept under the rug like so many cases involving connected families. My courtroom was packed that morning. I'm talking standing room only. Local news crews, veterans wearing their service uniforms, community activists, and regular citizens who follow my cases had all shown up. There was electricity in the air. People knew something big was about to happen. They know how I operate. They know I don't play games. And they know that in my courtroom, your last name doesn't mean a thing. At exactly 9:30 a.m., my bailiff called the case. The People versus Brandon Michael Webb, charged with aggravated assault on an elderly person. And let me tell you something. I've been doing this long enough to read people the second they walk through my doors. And Brandon Webb, he walked into my courtroom like he was walking into a country club. Tailored suit, expensive shoes, designer sunglasses that he didn't even bother to take off until his lawyer elbowed him. And that look on his face, that arrogant, entitled smirk that told everyone in that room he thought this was all beneath him. He didn't look sorry. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed that anyone would dare hold him accountable for anything. Right behind him came his attorney, David Carpenter, one of those high-priced defense lawyers who specialize in getting rich kids out of trouble. I've dealt with lawyers like him my whole career. They think they can smooth talk their way through anything. Not in my courtroom. Not today. Not ever. But here's what caught my attention and made my jaw tighten. When Brandon passed the row where William Hayes was sitting, wearing his Army veteran cap and with his arm in a sling from his dislocated shoulder, Brandon looked right at him and rolled his eyes. Rolled his eyes at a man who served his country. Rolled his eyes at a man he'd put in the hospital. That gesture told me everything I needed to know about this young man's character before he even opened his mouth. I looked up from my bench, and I'll be honest with you. My blood was already boiling. I'd already watched the security footage 3 times. I'd already read the medical reports. I'd already seen the photographs of William Hayes lying on that hospital bed with tubes and monitors hooked up to him. And I'd already decided that this young man was going to learn what accountability means today. "Mr. Four," I began, my voice steady but carrying that tone that everyone in my courtroom recognizes. "You're charged with aggravated assault on an elderly person, specifically on Mr. William Hayes, a 68-year-old United States Army veteran. How do you plead?" His attorney jumped up immediately. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We believe this is a gross mischaracterization of what actually occurred." I held up my hand and locked eyes with that lawyer. "Counselor, I asked your client, not you. Sit down. Then I turned my attention back to Brandon. Mr. Webb, do you have a tongue in your mouth? Can you speak for yourself? Because in my courtroom, I want to hear from the defendant, not some lawyer reading from a script. You got that? Brandon stood up, adjusted his tie, and looked at me with that same smirk still on his face. Not guilty, Your Honor. This whole situation has been blown way out of proportion. Blown out of proportion. Those words hung in the courtroom like a bomb waiting to explode. I slowly leaned forward, resting my elbows on the bench, and stared him down. Anyone who's ever been in my courtroom knows what that means. When I lean forward and lock eyes with you, you're about to get a dose of reality you'll never forget. Blown out of proportion? I repeated slowly. Mr. Webb, I've watched the security footage. I've read the hospital reports that show Mr. Hayes spent 3 days in intensive care. I've seen the photographs of his injuries. So when you stand in my courtroom and tell me this has been blown out of proportion, you're not just insulting me. You're insulting that man right there who served this country and who you put in the hospital because he asked you to wait your turn in line like everybody else. So let me ask you again, and I want you to think real carefully before you answer. Is that really your position? Brandon glanced at his lawyer, who was frantically shaking his head, trying to signal him to stay quiet. But Brandon's ego wouldn't let him back down. Your Honor, look, I was having a really bad day. I just lost a major client at work. I wasn't thinking straight. The old guy kept pushing my buttons and I just reacted. It was an accident. An accident. That word hit me like a slap in the face. I took off my glasses, set them down on the bench very carefully, and stood up. Now, anyone who knows me knows I don't leave my bench often. But when I do, somebody's about to learn a lesson they'll carry for the rest of their life. An accident? I said, walking down from the bench and standing directly in front of Brandon Webb. Mr. Webb, when you trip and spill coffee on someone, that's an accident. When you bump into someone in a crowded hallway, that's an accident. But when you deliberately put your hands on a 68-year-old man and shove him so hard that he crashes through a store display and ends up in the hospital for 3 days, that's not an accident. That's assault. That's violence. That's a crime. And you standing here calling it an accident tells me you don't understand the first thing about taking responsibility for your actions. The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Brandon's smirk was starting to fade, but his arrogance was still there, bubbling just beneath the surface. Your Honor, he said, with all due respect. I cut him off immediately. Let me stop you right there. In my experience, when someone starts a sentence with all due respect, they're about to say the most disrespectful thing they can think of. So go ahead. Let's hear it. Because I want this courtroom to understand exactly who you are. Brandon's lawyer was pulling on his sleeve, whispering urgently in his ear. But Brandon shook him off. Your Honor, my father is Police Chief Marcus Webb. He's served this city for 30 years. Our family has a reputation in this community. I made a mistake, but I don't think I should be treated like some common criminal just because this guy decided to make a big deal out of nothing. The gallery erupted. People were shouting. Veterans were standing up. My bailiff had to call for order. And I just stood there, staring at this young man, watching him dig his own grave with every word that came out of his mouth. When the courtroom finally settled down, I walked closer to Brandon Webb until I was standing right in front of him, close enough that he had to look me directly in the eye. So let me make sure I understand what you just said, I began, my voice low and controlled. You think your father's position means you should get special treatment. You think being the police chief's son puts you above the law. And you think Mr. Hayes, a man who wore the uniform of the United States Army and defended this country, made a big deal out of nothing when you assaulted him and put him in the hospital. Is that what you just told me? Brandon's face went pale. He was starting to realize how bad this looked, but his ego still wouldn't let him back down completely. I just mean, Your Honor, that I'm not a bad person. I've never been in trouble before. This is all just a misunderstanding. I shook my head. Mr. Webb, before we go any further, I want you to understand something. I want everyone in this courtroom to understand something. Mr. Hayes, would you please stand up? William Hayes slowly stood, supporting his injured arm. He was wearing his Army veteran cap, and despite everything this young man had put him through, he stood with quiet dignity. Mr. Hayes, I said, would you tell Mr. Webb who you are and what you've done for this country? William Hayes nodded. Your Honor, my name is William Hayes. I served in the United States Army from 1972 to 1992. I did 3 tours, including Desert Storm. I was awarded the Bronze Star and the Army Commendation Medal. After I retired from the service, I worked as a postal carrier for 20 years. I've lived in Detroit my whole life. And 5 days ago, this young man assaulted me in a grocery store because I asked him to wait his turn in line like everyone else. The emotion in that courtroom was overwhelming. I looked at Brandon Webb, whose face had lost all color. "Do you hear that, Mr. Webb? Do you understand what you just heard? You assaulted a decorated combat veteran, a man who served this country for 20 years, a man who risked his life so that you could live in freedom. And you called him this guy and said he made a big deal out of nothing. You should be ashamed of yourself." Before I could continue, something happened that nobody in that courtroom expected. A voice called out from the back, "Your Honor, may I approach?" Every head in that courtroom turned. Standing at the back of the courtroom was Police Chief Marcus Webb. He'd been sitting there the entire time, wearing civilian clothes, no uniform, no badge visible. He'd heard every word his son said. He'd watched his son show no remorse, no respect, no understanding of what he'd done. And the look on his face, it was pure heartbreak. Brandon spun around, and for the first time since walking into my courtroom, his arrogance completely shattered. "Dad?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" Chief Webb walked down the center aisle, and with each step, you could see the weight of 30 years in law enforcement pressing down on him. He was in his mid-50s, gray hair, weathered face, and eyes that had seen too much pain. When he reached the front of the courtroom, he stood at attention. "Chief Webb," I said with genuine respect, "thank you for being here. I know this can't be easy." The chief nodded. "Your Honor, it's not easy, but it's necessary." I addressed him directly. "Chief, your son seems to believe that your position as police chief should afford him special treatment. He's implied that because of who you are, the rules don't apply to him the same way they apply to everyone else. I'd like to give you an opportunity to address that belief." The courtroom held its breath. This was it. The moment a father had to choose between protecting his son and upholding everything he'd spent his career standing for. Chief Marcus Webb took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Your Honor, my son is wrong. He's been wrong about that his entire life, and I take responsibility for not correcting him sooner." He turned to look at Brandon, whose eyes were filling with tears. "I've spent 30 years wearing a badge, 30 years serving this community, 30 years enforcing the law without favor or prejudice. I've arrested people I grew up with. I've arrested people who went to church with my family. I've arrested people whose parents I considered friends. And I did it because the law applies to everyone equally, or it means nothing." The chief's voice grew stronger. "Your Honor, I watched the security footage the day after this happened. I saw my son assault Mr. Hayes. I saw him flash a badge that doesn't belong to him. I saw him threaten store employees. And I knew right then that I had failed as a father." Brandon was crying openly now. "Dad, please, I'm sorry." Chief Webb held up his hand. "Brandon, be quiet, you've said enough." He turned back to me. "Your Honor, I'm not here to ask for mercy. I'm not here to use my position to help my son avoid consequences. I'm here to tell you in this court that whatever sentence you believe is appropriate, you have my complete support. My son assaulted a decorated veteran. He showed no remorse. He disrespected this court, and he needs to face the full consequences of his actions." The chief paused, then continued. And what he said next brought tears to eyes throughout that courtroom. "Your Honor, yesterday I went to Mr. Hayes' home. I looked him in the eye, and I apologized for what my son did. I apologized for failing to raise a man who understands respect and accountability. And do you know what Mr. Hayes said to me?" Chief Webb's voice cracked. He said, "Chief, your son doesn't need protection. He needs help. He needs to understand that his actions have consequences." And he was right. He was absolutely right. I've been on this bench for decades. I've seen thousands of cases. But watching a police chief, a father, stand in open court and ask me to hold his son accountable without mercy, that took courage most people will never understand. I looked at Brandon Webb, who was sobbing, his whole body shaking. "Mr. Webb, do you understand what just happened here? Your father, who could have used his influence to make this disappear, chose justice over protecting you. He chose Mr. Hayes. He chose the principles he spent 30 years upholding. That's what real integrity looks like. That's the man you should have been trying to become. Brandon could barely get the words out through his tears. Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I was wrong about everything. I disrespected Mr. Hayes. I disrespected my father. I disrespected this court. Please, I understand now. I'm so sorry. I nodded slowly. That's the first honest thing you've said since you walked in here, Mr. Webb. But sorry isn't enough. Words are cheap. In my courtroom, you don't get to cry your way out of accountability. You want to prove you're sorry? You're going to show me through your actions. I returned to my bench and looked down at Brandon Webb. Brandon Michael Webb, I find you guilty of aggravated assault on an elderly person. Here is your sentence. You will serve 120 days in the county jail. You will complete 300 hours of community service working specifically with elderly veterans at the VA hospital. You will attend anger management and empathy counseling for 18 months. And you will write a formal letter of apology to Mr. Hayes, which you will read in this courtroom, followed by a face-to-face meeting where you will apologize to him personally. Brandon nodded, accepting each term. Yes, Your Honor. I'll do whatever it takes, but I wasn't finished. Furthermore, you will create and post a public video apology explaining what you did, why it was wrong, and what you're doing to make amends. Your father has agreed that this will be posted on the police department's website because accountability should be public, not hidden. And after you complete your sentence, you will speak at the police academy about privilege, entitlement, and what happens when you think your last name puts you above the law. I looked at Chief Webb. Chief, anything you'd like to add? The chief stood tall. Your Honor, Brandon will also be moving out of my house immediately upon completing his jail sentence. He's 29 years old. He's been living under my roof, under my protection, benefiting from my name and position. That ends today. He needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet, support himself, and understand that respect is earned through character, not inherited through family connections. Brandon looked devastated. Dad, please. Chief Webb's voice was firm but filled with love. Son, it's time. It's time for you to grow up and become the man I should have forced you to be years ago. I love you, but I love you enough to let you face this. I turned to William Hayes. Mr. Hayes, do you have anything you'd like to say? The elderly veteran stood slowly, still supporting his injured arm. Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I just want this young man to learn that every person deserves respect. It doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, young or old, connected or unknown. We're all human beings trying to live with dignity. If he learns that lesson, if he truly changes, then everything that happened to me will have been worth it. The grace in those words silenced everyone. Here was a man who'd been assaulted, hospitalized, and disrespected, offering forgiveness and wisdom. That's the kind of character you can't teach. That's the kind of strength that comes from a life of service and sacrifice. I addressed Brandon one final time. Mr. Webb, you heard that? A man you put in the hospital is showing you more grace than you deserve. You better spend every day of your sentence thinking about that. Thinking about the kind of man you want to become. Thinking about whether you want to continue being the person who walked in here today, or if you want to earn the kind of respect your father has earned through 3 decades of service. I brought down my gavel. Court is adjourned. As the officers approached to take Brandon into custody, Chief Webb walked over to his son. They stood face to face, and then the chief did something that broke every heart in that courtroom. He pulled his son into a tight embrace. I love you, son, the chief said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. I love you enough to let you face this. You'll get through it, and when you do, you'll be the man you were always supposed to be. Brandon sobbed into his father's shoulder. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, the chief whispered. Now prove it. The officers led Brandon away. Chief Webb stood there, tears streaming down his face, watching his son disappear through those courtroom doors. I walked over to him and extended my hand. We shook. 2 people who've dedicated their lives to justice. You did the right thing, Chief, I said quietly. Doesn't make it hurt any less, he replied. No, I agreed. But it makes it worth it. Before everyone left, I made one final statement to that packed courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed here today is about more than one case. It's about the choices we make when someone we love does wrong. Do we enable them? Protect them? Make excuses? Or do we love them enough to hold them accountable? I looked around at all those faces. Chief Webb could have used his position to bury this. Instead, he chose justice. He chose Mr. Hayes. He chose the principles that make a badge mean something. That's courage. That's integrity. That's what real love looks like. The courtroom erupted in applause. Veterans were saluting Chief Webb. People were crying. And William Hayes walked over to the chief and extended his good hand. "Chief," Hayes said, "your son is lucky to have a father like you. He'll learn from this. I can already see it." 6 months later, Brandon Webb walked out of county jail a completely different person. He'd lost the arrogance, gained humility, and found purpose. His 300 hours at the VA hospital turned into ongoing volunteer work that continues to this day. He apologized to William Hayes in a meeting that both men described as transformative. Hayes became a mentor to Brandon, teaching him about service, sacrifice, and what real strength means. Brandon's video apology was viewed over 2 million times. Young people across the country saw what real accountability looks like. They saw what happens when privilege meets justice head-on. Chief Webb attended Brandon's counseling sessions, supporting his son's genuine transformation. Their relationship, broken that day in court, rebuilt itself on honesty and mutual respect. And Brandon Webb, the entitled young man who thought his father's badge made him untouchable, now works as an advocate for veteran services and speaks to young people about the dangers of privilege and the power of accountability. My decision that day didn't just deliver justice. It saved a life, healed a family, and proved that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to protect someone from the consequences they need to face. If this story moved you, if you believe in this kind of justice, share this video with everyone you know. Hit that like button if you respect our veterans and honor the courage it takes to choose justice over comfort. Subscribe for more stories that prove accountability and compassion can coexist. And remember, real love isn't protecting people from consequences. It's supporting them through the consequences that make them better. That's the courage of Chief Marcus Webb. That's the grace of William Hayes. And that's the justice I deliver every single day in my courtroom. Justice served. Comment below and tell me what you think.